evening here in Switzerland, good morning West Coast, good afternoon, and good morning. Welcome everyone to the fourth and last installment of our four-part webinar series that presents a deep dive into the Swiss UAV ecosystem and its many facets. The objective of this webinar series has been to increase your awareness and to outline how your company can participate in Switzerland's technological and regulatory march towards the future. Each webinar in this series offers in-depth perspectives. Offers in-depth perspectives and will give you hints how you can go into the future in Switzerland. The focus of today's webinar is testing and refinement, and the goal of this presentation is to highlight some of the unique infrastructure to support organizations in Switzerland that you can engage with, as well as hear from a couple of companies who are successfully using Switzerland's ecosystem as a backdrop to their technical and commercial developments. Briefly about us and about myself, my name is Lukas Sieber and I will be moderating today's presentation. This webinar series has been co-developed by my organization, the Greater Zurich area, as well as the organization known as Invest in Switzerland. My colleague from Invest in Switzerland, Matt Julian, has been moderating the first and the third webinar and is also on the call today. Now, I would love to take just a short moment and to thank the wonderful people in the background that actually made this possible, that make the drone tour possible. Let me thank Pierre, Yves, Early, and Elisa Nessi from Invest in Switzerland, but I also would love to thank my dear colleagues, Beryl, as well as Milena from GZA, for supporting us throughout the year, moving the dates, coordinating, adjusting, and of course, at the end of the day, putting it all together. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure working with you. Well, just a few words about what we do, what Invest in Switzerland is doing, and what we are doing Greater Zurich area. The common goal of our organizations are to act as a single source of free support and assistance to companies interested in exploring business expansion opportunities in Switzerland. Those can be scientific collaborations, those can be partnerships, and of course, classical business expansions. Just a few words on housekeeping. Before proceeding further, let me acquaint you with what you see on the screen. The webinar will be now at 1 hour in duration, 45 minutes for presentations by our panelists, and we'll reserve about 15 minutes at the end for a Q&A. If you have questions, please submit them in the box on the right of your screen, and we will do our best to answer them during the session. If you are unable to respond to your specific questions today, we will reach out to you after the session. And if you'd like to reach out to any of us directly, our email addresses are being made available throughout today. And of course, I also would like to mention that we will record today's session and we will YouTube it and make available after today's webinar. Let me talk a little bit about the Silicon Valley of robotics, as Forbes framed Switzerland. In the past, Switzerland has established itself as a leading location for innovation, testing, and deployment of UAV technologies in a highly regulated but open skies environment. Our regulatory authorities are working closely with industry and the counterparts around the world to develop tools, digital technologies that will ultimately lead to an integrated and safe airspace. Switzerland offers a unique opportunity for companies to innovate, test, refine, and ultimately deploy the technologies in the real world, enabling the collection of invaluable experience and data that can be directly applied to the broader commercial market. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce all of our panelists. As soon as I'm done with the introduction of our panelists, I will give the screen or the floor, as you like, to the first panelist, which will be Andrea Marrazzo. He is Head of Autonomous Delivery and IoT Blockchain at Swiss Post. Andrea works for Swiss Post as Head of Autonomous Delivery. He has been responsible for Swiss Post's drone project since the beginning and has led the development of the existing use cases. With the autonomous delivery program, Swiss Post wants to look a few steps into the future to understand how autonomous technologies will influence logistics in the future. We're very excited to have you here and look forward to your presentation. Let me briefly introduce Tom Rehwinkel, Head of Regulatory Affairs Europe at Matternet. He will be our second speaker. Tom works at Matternet, the global leader in urban drone logistics. He lives in Zurich. He is responsible for the regulatory and safety strategy of Matternet in Switzerland and the rest of Europe, at the moment focusing on the implementation of the new EU drone regulations and the impact on Matternet operations. In previous roles, Tom has been an air traffic controller at the Netherlands Royal Air Force, and he has worked as the head of risk management at SkyGuide. Tom studied law at the University of Leiden and graduated from the Royal Military Academy in Breda, both in the Netherlands. Then, as a third speaker, we're going to have Andrea Perca. She's an airspace engineer, innovation and risk management at the Federal Office of Civil Aviation, or in short, FOCA. Andrea joined the Swiss Federal Office of Civil Aviation as airspace engineer in the Innovation and Digitalization Department and is currently responsible for operational approvals. Prior to joining FOCA, she was active in the domains of aeronautical data and system-wide information management. Andrea is an air navigation engineer and holds a mastery in aviation management. Last but not least, we will have Andreas Lamprecht, Airmap's CTO, with us. Airmap is the world's leading airspace management platform for drones, headquartered in California. In his role, Andreas is responsible for the company's research, development, and product management efforts. Since starting at Airmap, Andy has co-led the global development team from the company's European bases in Munich and Zurich. Before joining Airmap, Andreas spent a decade at Audi, helping shape the future of location, mobility, autonomous driving, and high-definition maps, while also defining the technology strategy. Andy holds a PhD in automotive engineering from the Technical University of Chemnitz in Germany. Andreas is based in Munich and travels to Zurich frequently. Now it is my great pleasure to give the floor to Andrea Marrazzo from the Swiss Post. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lukas, and thank you for the organization. So I will just jump directly into the presentation. I hope you see my screen. One of the first discussions or questions we always get is how do we partner or how do we proceed in such innovation projects when we start with a new topic? So that's exactly the goal. What I want to go through and explain to you guys is how do we tackle it on Swiss Post side, which steps do we take, and how do we work together with startups. Of course, with the example, you see it already on the screen with the Matternet drone. So Tom Rehwinkel will also share his side of the whole story, which is great, and I go through it. So basically, what I would like to show is which steps did we took, now talking about the drones journey, which we really felt that it started with the feeling also in public, from playing around to real application where we are standing now within those 5 years. And just so that you have a feeling about which steps it took and how the travel was, I want to show you or go through it a little bit. So in July 2015, that's more than 5 years ago now, we started our first trials together with Matternet around Bern with the first flights we had. And it was really, first of all, to get an understanding on our side about the technical capabilities, what is possible, what not. But on the other hand, also, it was for gaining the understanding, what do we need on the regulation side? So what does a regulator asks for, which processes, documents, and so on have to be filled, and so to be able to run these things. but it really was kind of a first technical proof of concept to see whether it makes sense or not. And maybe here a small anecdote. When we started those tests, we were flying back and forth in a rural region near Bern, and it was summer 2015. It was pretty hot, and we flew there day in day out for 2 weeks. And one day we were flying on a small hill up and down to see how the drone reacts with climb and declimb, which was pretty interesting and was important for us to get this understanding. And when we were standing on the hill on the top, a man approached us with his 2 grandchildren, and they took pictures of the drone, and we were talking for quite a long time. And in the end, when he was leaving, he turned up to us again and he asked us, but the things you are doing here, that doesn't count as working time. That's just for fun. So 2015, it really was, we really got the feeling of those drones are just something to play around. And it took 5 years to be there to arrive to a spot where we are now, where real application are set and everyone understands that there is an impact which we can reach with drones. So after that, it took almost 2 years to get the first commercial pilot. That was in Lugano, where we started in, I think, March, flying real blood samples from one hospital to the other. Directly after that, of course, we also partnered since the beginning with Matternet. So after these first pilots were done, we also invested into Matternet to show that we are committed in going forward there. End of the year 2017, we started the real operations, so regular operations, flying back and forth. 2018, we were then scaling up. We were flying in several regions, Bern, Zurich. We also had other regions in discussions to be prepared. 2019 wasn't the best year for us regarding media coverage. We had 2 incidents which we had to go through, which in the end was great because we learned a lot out of these 2 incidents. And since end of 2020, we are flying again in Lugano as in Zurich. So everything is going back to normal, and we are now scaling these operations. So basically here you see kind of the milestones which we normally go through. So it is a technical proof of concept, then also proof of concept regarding regulation, what we have to fulfill, then first pilots, then we go on into an operation, and as soon as we are there, we then start scaling it up. And that's always something we do together with our partners. Maybe a little bit more in detail about what we are doing. So I'm not sure whether you are aware of the operation in Lugano. So there we have a customer, which is a hospital group. It's the cantonal hospital from Ticino, so from the canton of Ticino, where we have connected 2 hospitals, the main hospital and a smaller hospital, which is in the center of the city. And we transport the blood samples from the smaller hospital to their main lab at the main hospital. That's basically the point. And why are we doing it with drones? You see it in the picture. It is a city, so traffic can get jammed up pretty hard. And if you want to transport blood samples via car, it gets sometimes pretty slow. And with the drone, of course, flying as a crow flies, it's pretty easy to predict how many minutes or even how many minutes and seconds the transportation will take. So that's one of the first, that's basically the first cases. We are flying beyond visual line of sight, fully autonomous, but I'll hand over these topics to Tom. Tom Rehwinkel will then be able to go much more in detail than me. But basically that was the first case, transporting blood samples for a hospital in a city basically. So here you see it as the crow flies. It is 1.1 kilometers. If you would have to go by car, it would be 2.5, 3 kilometers, something like that. Plus there are always and everywhere traffic lights, which are on. Then the second case is in Zurich, We started in January 2019. Now we restarted this year after the incidents. The case is the same. We are transporting blood samples from the university hospital in Zurich to their specialized lab at the University of Zurich. And also here we do these transportation on a daily routine, and the transportation time gets just lowered a lot if you do it by drone rather than by car. Then one of the most important questions we always get asked is, if you have a look into the future, what will change or how will your role change? And that's something which is on our side very important, and which is also interesting for startups or companies which want to partner with us, is that of course we say that the role we have today won't be the one we will have long term, because of course technology will evolve and all those things will lead to another approach on our side. So having today our organization where we have just a very selective number of transports, which mean one case, fixed routes from A to B or business to business, go on in some years where we will be able to fly 24/7, 365. So basically every time, still with fixed locations, and of course long shot, long term, being able to fulfill B2C deliveries with drones, fully autonomous, that's where we are looking toward. That's where we want to be. And also our role changed from business development lobbying to a service provider in midterm and long term, of course, being able to provide a full service, a full transportation service for the customers. And to achieve that, of course, we need startups, partners, companies, suppliers, which help us build this ecosystem, just because that's not something you can build on your own. And that's where we stand, and that's also how we get in touch with Matternet and build up this solution for the drone case. And that's normally how we tackle those things and go through. I'm already through my presentation. I don't want to waste too much of your rest time, just to give the other guys in the call or in the webinar the possibility to go on. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it, and hear you later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. If you have questions for Andrea Marrazzo from Swiss Post, please don't hesitate and add them to the panel to the right, and we will tackle them at the end of the webinar. And now it's my great pleasure to give the floor to Tom, representing Matternet. Tom, the screen is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lukas. Tom from Matternet. I will guide you in the next 10 minutes to my presentation. So as mentioned before, it's about urban healthcare logistics in the Swiss environment. So where did it start? Years ago for Matternet. The vision of Matternet, and not just for Matternet, is of course that the urbanization continues. Although we see now with COVID that it slows down a bit maybe, but it will continue afterwards again. And with an expected 80% of the worldwide population in 30 years living in huge cities, of course, we will have the on-demand economy requests, and e-commerce. Now, with the cities being more crowded and pollution or whatsoever, on-demand delivery today already, so not even in 30 years, but today already is, as Andrea told before, already slow, especially unpredictable, because what takes normally 10 minutes can take 30 minutes in case of an accident or whatever. And it is relatively expensive. So what is the vision of Matternet there? It's on-demand drone delivery, as you see here in the city of Zurich by night. On-demand drone delivery, it's fast, it's predictable, as Andrea said before as well. We know exactly, of course with a certain margin and a buffer, but we know exactly the flight time of a route. And it's relatively inexpensive, especially if you compare it to a 24/7 availability. Now, Matternet from Switzerland, Matterhorn, the famous mountain from the Toblerone chocolate as well. No, it's not. It's not Matternet, Matterhorn. It comes from the two words of matter and net, creating a network of matter. That's where the name comes from. And below the screen, you can see some of our partners, Sony Innovation Fund, Boeing Horizon X, Mercedes-Benz, and indeed, as Andrea said already, Swiss Post, luckily as well. So how does our ecosystem look like? We have everything is developed in-house and manufactured in-house. We have a platform, we have applications on our iPhones in the cloud. We have a vehicle, our Matternet M2 drone, a speed of maximum 70 kilometers per hour, a max payload of around 2 kilos, takeoff weight around 13 kilos, range approximately 20 kilometers maximum. We have a landing pad with beacons and sensors to be able to have precision landings from A to B. And we have our mission control, which is similar to air traffic control, as you will see in a couple of slides. And for the landing pad, what it means, too fast. The landing pad will be replaced in the near future by the Matternet station. We have one built up here in Zurich already, and we expect it to be assembled in Lugano, south of Switzerland, in the month of January. The idea of the station is that at the beginning, our operators, but taken over by hospital personnel themselves, they load the drone, which is landing on the top, of course. It will open up. The drone lands, and the people can load in advance already. The station can hold up to 5 payloads. In the near future, also battery and battery charging. And the drone lands, the battery is swapped, or the payload is loaded, unloaded. And then you really create an autonomous network where you don't need any operators anymore, besides the flight director on the mission control, which I will show afterwards. How does it look like, the ecosystem? We have the platform in the middle. We have our operators on the departure and takeoff, and the landing. We have our station or landing pad and our drone, of course, and we have our mission control, our flight director. And our system is fed by, in the particular case of Switzerland, by air traffic data provided by SkyGuide, the Swiss navigation service provider, and other operators. They feed the Airmap feed, the UTM provider, and I expect that we will hear more about it later on from the other Andreas. And the Airmap feed goes then into our platform, and we will see it later on our mission control. The idea is that, as I mentioned before, the operator will disappear, but with an automated system with stations in place. Now we go to a bit more into detail on our Swiss operations. Andrea mentioned it already. Here we see Lugano again. Behind us is the other hospital. The green line is the route into the other hospital in the south. In general, we apply the SORA, the specific operational risk assessment, which is more and more accepted as more and more globally accepted even as a qualitative risk assessment methodology. We apply it for years already, and it's also now incorporated into the new European regulation, 2019-947, the drone regulation. So we apply this SORA approach, and in the total package, which is sent then to the FOCA, to the regulator, another Andrea will explain a bit from the FOCA perspective there maybe. And we use, of course, geofencing as well. You see below a route over the Zurich Lake. In green, the specific route the drone will follow via GNSS. In orange, you see the containment area. So the drone has to stay within the 50 meters each side of the green route. And in whatever case the drone is not able to maintain that 50 meters on each side, it will activate the flight termination system with a parachute coming down, staying within the gray area, which is the so-called ground risk. The ground risk you see here related to Lugano, you see 2 routes, a white one and a blue one. The white one is during night because it overflies areas where people might be during the day, like a university and a park. But in the night, no one is there, so we can fly over. During the day, the ground risk would be too high, so we fly the blue route. At the moment, we don't fly the night route, it was last year. But that's how we deal with getting to a ground risk acceptable for us, of course, and finally for the regulator as well. We fly in controlled airspace, BVLOS, beyond visual line of sight. These we saw already from Andrea. We have a bit more in between already. Well, almost 5,000 flight legs with more than 2,300 successful deliveries. Zurich, here you see the BVLOS route in Zurich. On the, let's say, the southern part is where the university hospital is. It's a 2.25 kilometer route, 2.5 kilometer route towards the laboratory in the north. And some Zurich facts, also more than 1,100 flights and still continuing. Here quickly a bit about our mission control. So as I said, it's similar to a flight traffic control. You see the Zurich lake here in the middle and the Zurich area around. The route is the gray line. In blue in the middle, you see our drone with 2 circles pointing out traffic avoidance, traffic collision avoidance circles for 30 seconds and 1 minute. If we would have crossing traffic, then the system would warn us with, if needed, even with the 30 seconds and 1 minute circles, to eventually, if needed, do avoidance actions. So a return or lower with the fly lower with the drone. And in general, the idea is, of course, to have a better situational awareness. Weather information, of course, is available as well. And finally, all to be used for situational awareness for deconflicting. And again, with the feed from Airmap, for example, to understand the picture, the other aviation stakeholders in the area. How does it look today? That's something for the future. And today, here you see a nice picture of the Lugano Hospital on the left. In front, you see a Rega HEMS helicopter, and just visible is our drone. So we have everything available to avoid on a tactical and strategic way, even strategic mitigations to avoid any collisions or incidents whatsoever. But it's all not the most efficient way. It's based on procedures, it's based on coordination with air traffic control, all these kind of things. It works, but it's quite time consuming. And of course, in the future, we want to better integrate manned and unmanned aircraft traffic in this lower airspace, the very low level airspace, by exchanging flight data and flight paths and flight plans. Again, there, of course, one of the key players is a company like Airmap, an interface with ATC, Uspace, UTM, what we are trialing here in Switzerland with the Skyguide, the air traffic control company here in Switzerland, and dynamic geofencing. So depending on crossing traffic, time of the day, whatever, you could think about a dynamic geofencing, and in general, improve airspace surveillance and cellular connectivity. Then one of the questions is, why Switzerland, when it's not about Matterhorn and Matternet? Here is a picture I found on the internet. It's Switzerland Innovation, which is a company as well, but that's not the idea. It's just a symbol of Switzerland being as innovative as it is, because last week there was the new World Talent Ranking again of talent ranking, and there again, I think for the 6th or 7th consecutive year, it was Switzerland on top there, and that makes Switzerland, it strengthens itself, of course, because if you then continue, it is you have the ETH, you have the Zurich University of Applied Science, you have a very pragmatic BATSL, Federal Office of Civil Aviation, very pragmatic in explaining and applying the present regulation in Switzerland. We ourselves have a very strong partner in Swisspost, of course, which is also very important. And one example is the application from Skyguide, the app, in the Swiss Uspace, showing the innovative mindset of Skyguide. But I think in general, what is key here, and I think that's where Lukas started with, I can just copy paste one of the first slides he showed, and that's the one of this one with the disruptive companies and the world leading institutes and whatsoever. And that's really, we are expanding towards Japan and in Germany and whatsoever, but I think Switzerland will always be the cradle. We will always cooperate here with Swisspost, mainly because of the innovative mindset Switzerland has in general. Thank you, Lukas.
Thank you so much, Tom. That has been really, really interesting. If you have questions for Tom, please don't hesitate to share them in the questions panel to the right. And should you feel like watching and seeing Matternet's beautiful platform, go to YouTube, and it's one of the latest YouTube videos by Matternet. You can see the news station. It's a gorgeous thing. So this gives me the pleasure to give the floor to the next speaker. I believe it's Andreas Lamprecht. No, it's Andrea Perca from FOCA, my mistake. Andrea, the floor, the screen is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you as well. Good day, everybody. I hope you can see my screen and you can hear me.
Yes, all good. Thank you.
Oh, great. And thank you for organizers the webinars and for the invitation. My name is Andrea Perca. I work as an airspace engineer in the Innovation and Digitalization unit of the Swiss Federal Office of Civil Aviation. And in this presentation, I'm just going to give you a short overview of how we approach the unmanned aircraft operations from a regulatory point of view. So first about some words about us. So if you participated in previous webinars, in the first one, actually, you probably have heard my colleague Marcel Kegi, the co-leader of our unit, talking about our mission in our group. If not, I would suggest that I would encourage that you have a look at it for more details. But in short words, so we deal with new technologies. So our mission is we look at the way how to find the right regulatory framework that on one side protects public interest, safety, security, environmental protection, but in the same time also support and maximizes the room for innovation and makes it possible for companies who are in research and development and academic bodies to get innovative ideas from concept up to a deployment phase. So how we look at unmanned operation is different than how the traditional manned aviation is being built, and the main difference comes on one side by the fact that in this case there is no human on board, and then also from the novelty of the operations and the experience that we have. So the approach is it's rather holistic. So there are different elements that build up an activity and a test, for example, but everyone it's different in itself. Everyone can be specific. So that's why, as Tom mentioned in the previous presentation, we use a specific operation risk assessment, the so-called SORA, which is a methodology that allows us to address each activity, each operation in an individual manner. So this methodology in itself, it's rather non-prescriptive. However, it puts into a same frame, the language and the safety targets for such operations. So in principle, it looks from the risk. If every activity will have its own risk, and in the same time, it will require own mitigation measures to address these risks. That's why, again, to compare it with the manned part, it's less prescriptive, and it's up to the operator to have the possibility to build a safety case and to show to us as regulators how the safety objectives can be done. In short terms, like how the methodology addresses it's from one side looking at the ground risk, so the risk for people that are below the flight path, and as much as on the air risk. So we're looking at the whole ecosystem of the other airspace users. And building up on this, a whole language, which is very important because it's the language that we have between the regulators and the applicants in order to make sure the understanding is assured. So we use it in Switzerland since a long time. We also contributed strongly to its development. It started here, and it's in the process of becoming also a global standard. It is an iterative loop. So as I mentioned before, it's not a checklist that it's done and finished. It's rather an iterative process in which, based on the safety case, which takes into account the ground part, the air part, a safety portfolio is developed, which then receives a feedback, and further on it gets enhanced until the safety objectives are met. That's why the know-how of the methodology and the language behind it's key to make sure that the safety case is properly addressed. As I mentioned before, so we use it strongly, but it's also an emerging global standard for drone regulation. So this means that an operation which is being assessed based on SORA would be seen also on other parts of the world, and it would sure ease the process of getting operational approvals from other locations. In terms of cooperation, I mean, we are very much committed to it, and it's for us it's very important that we have a open and productive exchange with institutions, universities, and also other members of the ecosystem, because it's where the know-how gets developed, and the exchange of it's key for making sure that everything gets developed in the right direction. We also work closely with the FAA, which we have also a declaration of intent, but also standardization bodies and other groups of industry, and also international organizations such as ICAO or GUTMA, for example. Thank you once again. If you have questions, I'm looking forward to it during the question and answer phase. And I hope I could give you an overview of how we approach the operational approvals within FOCA.
Thank you so much, Andrea. You absolutely could do that, and you were able to show that, and I look forward to the questions. Please, dear guests, don't hesitate to share your questions on the right side of your screens. Last but not least, I have the great pleasure to introduce Andreas Lamprecht, CTO of Airmap, and of course also a title you have is Honorary Ambassador of the Greater Zurich area. Andreas, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Lukas. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present here. My name is Andy Lamprecht. I'm from a company called Airmap. And as the name implies, we kind of make maps for the air and associated functions with it. I would like to show you a few of our core value added capabilities that we provide to basically two sides of the spectrum. They all arise from a common problem set, which is that from growing activity in the airspace, there is an overwhelming problem that comes across where traditional workflows just are at its scalability limit, because you have lots of humans in the loop, and you have just procedures that are not meant to be used by thousands and thousands and possibly even millions at some point participants in the airspace. And that's where UAS traffic management, UTM, can help. In Switzerland, or more, I should say, in Europe, people have chosen to not use the term UTM, but come up with with a separate name, which is Airspace, but basically it's the same thing. So just to avoid confusion, it means the same. I mentioned earlier there are a number of stakeholders that UTM is really trying to connect. In order to simplify a little bit, you have on the one side people who manage airspace, who are responsible to oversee what is happening in the airspace. And then on the other side, you have the people or the users of the airspace. So people who want to access airspace to conduct services. And UTM caters to those stakeholders. And Airmap this is very much a topic that is very much subject to regulatory development and standardization worldwide. And Airmap, as you can see on the world map here, has really focused its activities in the US, where we were founded. We're basically a US startup still. And then Europe, with Switzerland being our main hub currently for use-based development in the European continent, for good reasons. It's a bit abstract always. What does it mean, UTM? What are the products? What are you selling? So I wanted to just briefly share some of our product UTM Center, that's a tool authorities can use to manage flight approvals. Airboss is an application an operator can use to do flight planning. Traffic Viewer is something also authorities or, for instance, police stations, but also enterprises can use to see and determine if is it safe to fly or who is flying. So that's a real-time view. Airmap for drones is a consumer application that recreational drone pilots or also professional ones can use to just orient themselves and find out what kind of rules apply for them for a specific flight if they want to go up in the air and fly. And then we have all of these services that are powering those products available in a developer platform. So you can connect with your own application, much like Matternet did, for instance, and Swisspost. So they don't use the Airmap for drones application to determine if it's safe to fly or not, or the traffic viewer to receive the surveillance data about activities in real time. They connect to our developer platform, and then they can create a much more embedded experience into their tool suite that they have. To show a little bit about the complexity and in the end why we chose to do so much activity in Switzerland, UTM is very much deviating from the previous model where you have just one authority who defines the rules of the air, and then one authority who is tasked with the operational management of making sure nobody collides. So in manned aviation, you typically have one civil aviation authority and then one air navigation service provider. And that's it for UTM in the future. And this model here is very important. It deviates from this model. You still have one air navigation service provider, and you have one kind of overseeing civil aviation authority, but then you have this what is called competitive or open industry environment, where you have multiple service providers that are competing against each other. So very much like in the mobile phone space, where you as a user, you can choose if you buy an Apple phone or a Samsung phone, and then you can choose if you go to Swisscom for your data contract, or to Vodafone or to T-Mobile. This is what the future of traffic management will also look like. And it's very helpful for us that Switzerland has these quite close ties with the United States, with the Federal Aviation Administration, and also to NASA, because essentially through the way Switzerland is then influencing Europe and influencing the rulemaking process of the European Commission and the EASA, we are now looking at a future where those two models in the US and in Europe are very much the same, more or less. There are some differences, but largely it's relatively similar. Our engagement in Switzerland primarily focuses in our partnership with Skyguide. We are a technology provider to them, and basically supply technology to them that lets them automate and digitize the process of getting approval to fly in controlled airspace. This applies for drones, but also all kinds of other special flights like balloons or fireworks or photo flights, but also the Matternet, the blood delivery flights in Lugano, for instance. This will in the future be, we're actually quite soon before this product will be launched publicly, and then you don't have to use a paper-based process anymore. You can digitally submit your flight requests and get approval for it in a shorter time duration as well. Many more use-based services are coming up. We're not only talking about flight authorization, but for instance also something that we now developed in the implementation program of use-based in Switzerland, which is hosted by the Federal Office of Civil Aviation. It's called SUSI, Swiss Use-Based Implementation. And the capability that has been developed there and tested this year is about remote identification. So it's very similar problem to cars. You have not only good actors, but also some who don't always obey the rules, and this creates some need for determining who is the responsible entity behind a flight. The only problem is with drones, you don't have a license plate that you can take a photo picture of and identify the operator or the owner of the car. You need something else because the drone is up in the air. So industry has come together already in 2019 and 18 and developed an industry standard that allows you to do that, to remotely identify a drone. And in a group of industry collaborators, there's about 10 service providers currently in this group, and the FOCA, as well as multiple public safety authorities who are kind of users of the system in the end. We developed a national test bed for this. Our activities that are included in this are, for instance, legal documents that regulate or govern how the data is shared between the different stakeholders, test plan and approval conditions on how to mature the system and make sure the performance is up to the desired outcome. And of course, lots of system maturity, because wherever you test, you find bugs and then you correct them. Most of this work is freely available to the public currently. If you go to susi.swiss, that's the URL, you can find the material. Some of it is licensed under a Creative Commons license, and then there's more activities coming up in the near future, because this testbed is going to be launched live. It's called a soft launch, where people can then on a voluntary basis use the system, and we get more experiences with it and get to also influence the regulatory implementation, of course, with these learnings in the future. So overall, we're very happy with our engagement in Switzerland, first and foremost because it's kind of a perfect storm of parties that come together, lots of industry and startups that come out of the universities with lots of talent in the drone space, in the aerial robotics space, an air navigation service provider who's really leading the charge across Europe in establishing operational experience of those use-based volumes. The government with the Swiss FOCA primarily involved in shaping the regulations and enabling those complex operations. And of course, lots of drone enthusiasts and aviation enthusiasts in general in the Swiss citizenship environment. So that's what drove our decision to come to Switzerland already back in 2018. That's it. Thank you very much. Back to the host.
The host am I. Thank you so much, Andreas. Highly interesting. Let's now tackle some of the questions we received. Let me quickly share. That's exactly what I wanted to do. Thank you so much. So a few of the questions we received. Let me just make that full screen again. Of course, they focus on the different testing opportunities in Switzerland, and talking to UAV companies in the US. BVLOS is certainly a big accomplishment. BVLOS over cities is extremely difficult to accomplish, and sometimes coming from the US, something that that takes years and years in preparation. However, in Switzerland, we have seen that this is possible in a short period of time. Andrea, Perca, what is the best way for a startup, for a company anywhere in the world to launch tests in Switzerland, like BVLOS, but also Swarm or night flights? What are the first steps companies need to take to be able to test in Switzerland technologies that are hard to test elsewhere in the world?
So you mentioned BVLOS operations. By the law, this is something that requires an authorization from us, because in principle, like, depending on the risk of the operation, some require an authorization and some do not. When an operation does require, then it's the risk assessment that I presented before that we use as a baseline. And the first step from this regulatory point of view would be that companies get in contact with us, and depending on the individual situation, then a further assessment can take place. So there is not a default answer, because there might be different requirements on a case-by-case basis. But this first initial contact, it's important, because that's how we get to learn and how we get to know what exactly is the intent.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Andrea, for that answer. Let me add to that. We've been talking about BVLOS. We've heard about BVLOS from Matternet and Airmap. We oftentimes receive questions on testing BVLOS in conjunction with night flights. We hear about swarm flights and even more complicated propositions. The same procedure again, companies can contact you, Andrea, Perca, and find a way to make it possible, or would you exclude anything beyond BVLOS as of today?
So the philosophy that that we follow, and it's actually the philosophy stemming from the SORA, it's that it's the operator who has the card, so to say. So it's the operator who has to build a safety case based on the operation that it's being followed, and with this safety case, the exchange with the regulator takes place. So there is nothing, so to say, from the beginning that stops development. So it's always a discussion around the specific operation and the specific safety case that, as I mentioned before, it's up to, as a first step, it's in the hands of the operator to build it and show that it complies and it fulfills assures the safety of it all.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. Then we received a question for Andrea Marrazzo. Could you please elaborate a little bit on Swiss Post's plan for heavy payload and manned UAVs? Is that something you guys spend time on?
Good question. So of course we are looking in all those cases. Let's start with heavy payload. This could be interesting for us, so we were already thinking about it. The point there is, maybe to just take what Andrea Perca said, the point is having heavy payload means having even a heavier drone, which means that the risk if something happens is higher. So there, that's not something we felt safe to already really dig into it, just because with basically what we learned in the last 5 years, we said that's something which we first have to prove that the technology in small scale works before we start flying around a ton and then having a drone which is 4 tons, and if something happens, the risk of hurting someone is much higher. So there it is interesting. We are looking into it. We already have made some calculations which looks that there are cases, but not highest priority. And regarding people transportation, it's almost the same. And basically what we are always saying is moving that counts also on the ground. So if we're talking about autonomous delivery cars or buses, which we are also trialing, basically what you are moving is irrelevant. Normally if you just have a person in it, it is just something which you have to handle a little bit more careful than if it's blood samples or something else. But the concept of transporting something from A to B stays the same. And there it's the same thing for drones, where you're able to make people transport. The question is do we feel safe enough on one hand to transport heavy loads, and then the next step would be, are you safe enough, or do you feel safe enough to transport heavy loads which are human and are a little bit more sensible for flight maneuvers and those things. So it's interesting, we're looking into it, but we're giving it a little bit more time to feel or see still the technology evolving until we will go into it.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much, Andrea Marrazzo, for that answer. So the next question goes to all of you. Looking back at the last 5 years of Swiss UAV development, and projecting to the next 5 years, what's coming? We've seen a rapid pace around development and implementation, for instance, with you, Andreas, with Airspace, but of course also with the launch of the test flights in Ticino and elsewhere in Switzerland. What's next on the Swiss UAV horizon? How can we keep the innovation as high as it has been in the last 5 years? Who wants first?
I can take the lead.
Thank you.
I would say from our point of view, one of the steps that we look forward to, it's Airspace. So this is something that in the short term, hopefully, of course, it will depend on how the regulation will evolve and also the technology surrounding it. But I would, if I were to mention one point, it would be Airspace.
Yeah, I agree to what Andrea said. I think for Matternet as well, the Airspace, the implementation of Airspace, connecting the manned aviation with the UAS, I think that's really key. We see it now in Zurich. We have a certain integration and that works well, but we need definitely way more ways of communicating in an automated way with other aviation stakeholders, making it easier to have operations, not just for us, but also for manned aviation, of course. I think that's key. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it, cooperating with SkyGuide and SUSI and Airmap. So let's see.
Sounds good. Thank you. Andreas, what's your position? What's the next step for Airmap in Switzerland?
Yeah, I think two things. One is definitely the scaling of operations, making solutions much more robust, which also, and quite frankly, I mean, this is quite a change we're looking at, because the regulatory environment will be different, right? So in the past, we have been able to do kind of these individual flights on a one-by-one basis, and the theme, the headline was that everybody needs to learn. You can't assume that the regulator knows how these innovative new solutions work, and you also can't assume that those new innovative people know exactly what the regulatory safety requirements are. So you had kind of a disconnect that we were able to close by just testing. But now, of course, that kind of leads into a new world where the target levels of safety is better defined and the systems are more mature. And so now, as Tom just mentioned, it's about scaling and growing and removing the friction. And that's still a process that doesn't come just from today and tomorrow. Another aspect that is I think really interesting, and we had another Swiss company making some news in the past weeks, is indoor operations with drones, because there you of course don't need so much to think about what the airspace looks like and what other aircraft are in the sky, but there's still a ton of room for innovation in those logistics use cases that happen indoor. So I find that quite interesting as well.
Thank you so much. I think we end the webinar here. We have a few more questions that came in. We will answer those bilaterally in conjunction with our speakers. I would like to thank you, dear guests, for joining us today, for watching our presentations. I would love to, of course, thanks to the panelists, to the speakers of today's webinar. Last but not least, I would love to thank Invest Western Switzerland, Matt Julian, and my organization, the Greater Zurich area, for the support throughout the year and putting together the 4-part drone tour across Switzerland. It has been a huge pleasure being involved with all of you. Thank you so much, and please watch out for the follow-up email, including the presentations of today's webinar. Have a lovely evening, a great day, and hopefully see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.